are here today. And over the last 4 years, we've enjoyed I think, cordial relationship. We've worked together on many, many issues of great importance. However, today, your appearance here today, and I have to be honest with you, it comes after 6 months after I've requested your testimony following my comprehensive report into the catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan. I have constitutional authority, and I have that constitutional authority that I, as chairman, am responsible for. And I also have a responsibility to the American people and to the 13 servicemen and women who died, and all the many other service members who died, and the Afghan allies left behind who died, and the women who were left behind. This, under Article 1 of the Constitution, is Congress's greatest role of oversight and transparency. I would have to say I've been disappointed that you've ignored my request for your testimony, forcing me to subpoena you not once, but twice. And rather than accept my good faith efforts to accommodate your schedule, you failed to show up for your September hearing. And I don't like this probably any more than you do, but while your presence here is duly noted, you are showing up only after violating a congressional subpoena, triggering consideration of a resolution holding you in contempt of Congress. I've been more than accommodating during the process, but you and your staff have fought this committee every step of the way. The fact that you're here today on one of the last weeks of the 118th Congress clearly demonstrates my commitment to this critical issue, even in the face of persistent delays. You insist you have appeared before Congress 14 times, but the truth be told, that number is really misleading. You've not appeared once during my chairmanship to testify about the disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal before this committee. Twice you have appeared on the budget. And as the head of the State Department, it was your duty to appear before this committee to inform us about legislative solutions to the issues outlined in my Afghanistan report so that this never happens again. My only goal has been to work together with you, sir, to help prevent that such another catastrophic event, to prevent that from ever happening again. Instead, you prioritized this administration's political agenda, touting the failed withdrawal as a success. On April 14th, 2021, President Biden announced his decision to withdraw from Afghanistan, no matter what the cost, go to zero, were his words. As Secretary of State, you were entrusted with the protection of American interests and citizens overseas. You ignored the Taliban's violations of the Doha Agreement. You ignored objections by our NATO and Afghan allies. You ignored the security risk in keeping the U.S. Embassy in Kabul open, despite warnings from our top military advisors. You ignored the warnings of collapse by your own personnel, as evidenced by the July 2021 descent channel cable, one that I call a cry for help that was unanswered. And now, tragically, more than 3 years after this administration's disastrous withdrawal, you're finally here to take responsibility. Mr. Secretary, I've reviewed thousands of pages of documents produced in discovery by the State Department. I've conducted 18 transcribed interviews, led 8 hearings on the Afghanistan withdrawal. I do not take the issue of subpoenas lightly, but today's hearing in your department provided these only after the committee was forced to use its oversight powers. My comprehensive investigation reveals that President Biden's unconstitutional surrender to the Taliban, that you had plenty of opportunity to plan for the inevitable collapse of Afghanistan. Instead, even with the warning bells sounding loudly, ringing loudly. You denied the imminent and dangerous threats to American interests, American citizens, and our decade-long Afghan partners. All the while, the Taliban captured province after province on their march to Kabul. And rather than step up as America's chief diplomat, you delegated this responsibility. And as the Taliban Kabul was surrendered to the Taliban on August the 14th, 2021, you, sir, were vacationing in East Hampton, New York. I do not say that with delight. I say that as a fact. Mr. Secretary, to preserve optics, you sacrificed the safety and security of our service members, diplomats, citizens, and allies. You treated terrorists as diplomatic partners and created an environment ripe for chaos. And on October 26, 2021, an ISIS-K terrorist detonated a suicide bomb at the Hamid Karzai International Airport, murdering 13 heroic U.S. service members and over 170 Afghan civilians. My heart goes out to the Gold Star families, and I pray for them every day. Every day I've been chairman of this committee. It was the deadliest day for the United States presence in in Afghanistan since 2012. And the saddest thing, sir, is it did not have to happen. Mr. Secretary, it's time that we again remember the fundamental principles of diplomacy. Peace may only be obtained through strength. This catastrophic event was the beginning of a failed foreign policy that lit the world on fire. I welcome your testimony, and I hope we take the opportunity for you first to take accountability, and second, for us to move forward so this never happens again. As you are aware, we cannot fix a problem without first admitting that there is a problem. I've dedicated my tenure as chairman of this important committee on this very important issue. And your testimony here today will help guide the work of the next Congress and the incoming administration. The American people, the U.S. service members, the veterans, and most importantly, our Gold Star families who are present here today deserve better. They deserve your candor, commitment, and transparency. With that, the chair now recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Meeks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me first say to you that it has been a distinct honor, privilege, and pleasure of working with you. We've worked together now for over 4 years, 2 years of which I was the chair and 2 years of which you were the chair. And really, there's been no difference. Our relationship only intensified. We worked collectively together on behalf of the people of the United States of America. You're a man of integrity. You're a friend. It has been an honor and a privilege to serve with you and to continue to serve with you because we know, as you've stated, you're not going anywhere. You will still be here as a member of the United States House of Representatives. I appreciate the fact that we've always, even when we disagree, as we will disagree on this hearing, but we've always been able to talk about it, be honest with one another, and that's what's really important. You know, when you have honesty and truth and can talk, you can disagree, but it never becomes personal because of you and the character that you have. So I just have to say for the record that it's been an honor. You have been a fair chair, as well as when you were the ranking member, you have been a fair ranking member because you are a fair individual. That's who you are at the essence. And I want to also congratulate Mr. Mass, the incoming chair. And I look forward to working with you. There's no question in anyone's mind that you're loyal to the United States of America. You have done everything in the military and otherwise to represent this country. And I look forward to working with you come January 3rd or 4th when this committee resumes as the next chair of this committee. and look forward to working with you in the same manner that I've worked with Mr. McCall. Now,
Yeah, thank you for those kind words. I appreciate that.
now I want to thank you, Secretary Blinken, for being here today, and I know that we want to get you out. There's a lot that's going on in Syria and around the world, and you will be leaving here or on a plane immediately post this here, so your departure will take you straight to the Middle East, where there's dealing with the related situations of Syria. But thank you for being here. And for me, Mr. Secretary, this will be, if I recall correctly, your 6th time being that you've joined us to provide testimony, including your appearance in September of 2021. You were the very first cabinet official from the Biden administration to testify to Congress immediately after our withdrawal from Afghanistan. And I will, even before you testified before the Senate, you were right here in the House to testify about that. And despite insisting that they needed to hear answers from you and repeatedly accused you of stonewalling, my Republican colleagues nevertheless released what I see as a partisan and misleading report on the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan in September that distorts the facts received in their own investigation from 16 State Department witnesses and thousands of pages of documents that you made available to us. Sadly, on this brand, as I have pointed out at every term and every hearing, the Republicans' so-called investigation has been nothing but a cudgel aimed at partisan politics, in my opinion, to claim now that it's aimed at a real and legislative purpose when I don't see any tangible. They have not introduced a single bill. There's not been a bill at all introduced from this investigation. But there is perhaps no better example on how dishonest and how, well, I would say politically motivated this exercise has been than how the Republicans misled the public on the ISIS attack at Abbey Gate. For months, Republicans publicly suggested the Abbey Gate bombing could have been prevented and that a Marine had a bomber in his sights. Privately, however, they received information from the Department of Defense's investigation dating back as far as February of 2022 and again reinforced in April of 2024, findings that the bomber and the person the Marine identified were two different people and that the attack was not preventable. Because the GOP had this information, you would think it would be logical to assume that the GOP's report would make those facts crystal clear. So does a report do that? No. Instead of being straightforward with the American people or the Gold Star families who have suffered so much and who we all keep deeply in our prayers, they continued to muddle the facts. Notwithstanding DOD's clear evidence, the GOP report tries to sow doubt on the DOD's findings by asserting on page 27 that, quote, many who were on the ground that day still believe they were one and the same. The full report remains classified, end quote. To my colleagues across the aisle, beliefs are not facts. Information that the Department of Defense publicly reported, for which I ask unanimous consent to submit for the record,
Without objection, so ordered.
is not classified. The two men were not the same. So changing or twisting the truth seems to me only happens for political gain. And that not only hurts the integrity of this committee, it hurts the families of the 13 service members who lost their lives during the horrific terrorist attack, who have been led to believe that there are some greater truth to unearth that when in reality there just is not. So I also ask unanimous consent to submit for the record the minority memorandum that I released in September of this year, that report summarizes the actual facts of the committee's investigation,
Without objection, so ordered.
which were remarkably consistent across 20 witnesses and found the following. The full U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan was set into irreversible motion by President Donald Trump when he concluded the Doha deal with the Taliban and ordered the withdrawal of troops per that agreement, first from 14,000 to 8,600, and then all the way down to 2,500 by January 15th, 2020. And after the Trump administration failed to plan for the withdrawal they started, the Biden administration conducted a thorough policy review, acknowledged that we would again be at war with the Taliban if they abandoned the Doha deal, and finished the work his predecessor started by building a withdrawal and contingency plan from the ground up through 2021. And after President Ghani's decision to flee Afghanistan led to the rapid collapse of the Afghan government and security forces, creating the chaos on the ground, the men and women of the State Department acted heroically alongside their military colleagues to conduct the largest airlift in U.S. history, relocating more than 124,000 people. So I believe that President Biden ultimately made the right decision to end our 20-year war in Afghanistan and not ask another generation of Americans to make an ultimate sacrifice for a war that no longer had a purpose. No one here has argued that our withdrawal was perfect. So I want to be clear, I'm not saying that I don't know any withdrawal that has been perfect. But we owe it to ourselves and our military and diplomatic personnel on the front lines to learn from it. And from those 20 years of war in which they served, and to incorporate those lessons of 20 years in the future. But we do them a disservice when we do not examine all of the facts. If we are to honor the 800,000 Americans who served in Afghanistan since 2001, including the 2,461 military personnel killed over the 2 decades of war, we should have conducted proper oversight of the policy decisions made across not one administration, but 4 administrations, not only for the months in which President Biden was in office for the sole purpose of politics. For the honest, bipartisan assessment, we will have to await the Afghanistan War Commission's report due in 2026, because what we have here today is not the true, complete fact-finding. In my estimation, it's politics. And finally, let me just say this, though. I want to conclude by thanking Chairman McCall for honoring a request that I made publicly. I asked that he publicly release all of the transcripts from closed-door interviews that were part of this Afghanistan investigation. And I asked the chairman to do the same for all other remaining transcribed interviews conducted as part of the committee's oversight investigation. And the American taxpayers paid for this work. I asked, and you responded, and you did cooperate and make them all public, and for that, I thank you. And with that, I yield back.
I appreciate the ranking member's comments on that. I intend to release all of this to the American people. We are negotiating a interview with Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor. It may be in a classified setting. To the extent we can release that to the American people, we certainly will. I also want to state that there are 2 pieces of legislation currently in the National Defense Authorization that deal with this withdrawal from Afghanistan. One from me on having one point of contact, who's in charge, if you will. Another one by Warren Davidson on evacuation. So with that, I'd like to say to the members that opening statements may be submitted for the record. I want to welcome the 71st Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, someone I do have admiration for. We disagree on this one strongly, but we have traveled abroad. And at the end of the day, when we travel abroad, we're all Americans. But as you know, sir, I have issue with you over the handling of this matter, and I recognize you for your testimony here today.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Meeks, distinguished colleagues on this committee, first of all, let me just say I have very much appreciated working with you these past 4 years, working with the Ranking Member. I think we've done good and important things together.
Blinken, Secretary of Genocide, Butcher of Worcester.
258, we have a disruption.
Remind the audience members, disruption of committee proceedings is against the law. Holding up signs or making verbal outbursts during the proceedings is disruptive and will not be tolerated. Any disruption will result in a suspension of the proceedings until the Capitol Police can restore order. This includes the raising of hands and other forms of disruption. With that, I now recognize the Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to say how much I've valued and appreciated working with you these past 4 years, the dialogue that we've had, including with this committee, where we've agreed, where we've disagreed, including on Afghanistan. I want to recognize everyone who served in Afghanistan, including on this committee. Our thoughts are with the Gold Star families of the 2,461 American service members, as well as State Department and USAID employees.
Committee will suspend while the Capitol Police restore order to this committee. The gentleman will continue.
As I said, our thoughts are with all of the Gold Star families. They're with the State Department and USAID employees who lost their lives over the course of 20 years of our military involvement in Afghanistan. And I think today especially of the 13 heroes that we lost at Abbey Gate, and I deeply regret that we did not do more and could not do more to protect them. And to those families who are here with us today, you're in my thoughts, in my prayers. I wish that Nicole was here with us today. I'm deeply sorry that she's not. I'm also deeply grateful to the dedicated professionals from the State Department, from the Defense Department, from across the government, from civil society, other partners who did so much to support the people of Afghanistan over those 2 decades.
You scum! The blood of your victims will sweat.
Committee will come to order.
We will never let you forget.
Committee will suspend while the Capitol Police restore order.
Fucking slider!
Committee will come to order. The gentleman will continue.
Thank you. I'm here today to continue the department's extensive cooperation with this committee. As you know, Mr. Chairman, the department's provided over 20,000 pages of documents to you. We've conducted 9 high-level briefings for members. We facilitated transcribed interviews for more than 15 people. I personally testified before the House and Senate committees 14 times with questions on Afghanistan, including 4 times before this committee. Now, I believe that any attempt to understand and learn from the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan has to be put in the proper context of what preceded it, both in terms of the 2 decades following 9/11 and the decisions and events of 2020 to 2021 that culminated in the removal of our personnel. When President Biden took office, he inherited an agreement the previous administration had reached with the Taliban to remove all U.S. forces from Afghanistan by May 1st of 2021. At U.S. insistence, the Afghan government had released 5,000 Taliban prisoners, including top war commanders. The United States reduced our own troop levels from 14,000 to 2,500 in December of 2020. In return, the Taliban agreed to stop attacking U.S. and partner forces, to refrain from threatening Afghanistan's major cities, and to pursue intra-Afghan negotiations toward a ceasefire and a political settlement. But it continued a relentless march in the countryside so that it controlled or actively contested territory containing 3/4 of Afghanistan's population by December 2020. In January 2021, the Taliban was in the strongest military position it had been in since 9/11, and we had the smallest number of U.S. forces in Afghanistan since 2001. Despite the profound effects of the Doha Agreement, President Biden ultimately opted to implement the previous administration's decision to withdraw American troops and honor his pledge to end our nation's longest war. To the extent President Biden faced a choice, it was between ending the war or escalating it. Had he not followed through on his predecessor's commitment, attacks on our forces and allies would have resumed, and the Taliban's assault on the country's major cities would have commenced. That would have required sending tens of thousands more U.S. forces back into Afghanistan to defend ourselves and prevent a Taliban takeover, with at best the prospect of restoring a stalemate and remaining stuck in Afghanistan under fire indefinitely. President Biden inherited a deadline, but no plan to meet it. At his direction, beginning in the spring of 2021, the administration, and the State Department in particular, engaged in extensive planning for a whole range of outcomes. We pursued a sustained campaign to urge any Americans in Afghanistan to leave. We restarted and dramatically increased resources to what had been a moribund special immigrant visa program to bring Afghans who had worked by our side over 20 years to the United States. Even the U.S. government's most pessimistic assessments did not anticipate that the Afghan government and security forces would collapse so rapidly in the face of Taliban advances. Nevertheless, because of the administration's extensive interagency planning and coordination, when Kabul fell on August 15th, the United States was able to evacuate our embassy and relocate our diplomats to the airport within 48 hours, and then conduct the largest airlift in U.S. history, helping approximately 120,000 Americans, Afghans, and citizens of allied nations depart Afghanistan in just 2 weeks. In the 3 years since the end of our country's longest war, all of us, including myself, have wrestled with what we could have done differently during that period and over the preceding 2 decades. I asked retired Ambassador Dan Smith, one of our most senior diplomats, to lead an after-action review of the State Department's actions between January 2020 and August 2021. In response to Ambassador Smith's report, the Department has taken more than 40 concrete initiatives and identified steps to guide our response to future crises. The actions we've taken have already made a difference in subsequent emergencies, including in Sudan, in Israel, in Lebanon. Even as we work to address the places where we fell short, I firmly believe the President's decision to withdraw from Afghanistan was the right one. American troops are no longer fighting and dying in Afghanistan. The American people are safer and more secure. In fact, many of the most pessimistic predictions have been thoroughly disproven. We were told Afghanistan would once again become a haven for terrorists, and that, as the majority report contends, we would be all but blind to the situation on the ground. In fact, al-Qaeda, the group that attacked us on 9/11, has not regrouped in Afghanistan, and in August 2022, we launched a precision strike in downtown Kabul that took out its leader, Ayman al-Zawahiri, with no American boots on the ground. We were told that our allies would no longer trust us. Well, having just returned from more NATO meetings in Brussels and my 20th trip to the Indo-Pacific as Secretary of State, it's clear that our alliances, our partnerships, are stronger today than they've been in a generation. You can see that in the more than 50 countries that we brought together to defend Ukraine against Russia's ongoing aggression, and in the unity of purpose and action that we built for contending with the challenges posed by China. We were told hundreds of Americans and Afghan partners would be left behind. Yet today, every U.S. citizen who told us that they wanted to leave during the evacuation has now had the opportunity to do so. And to those Americans who entered the country since August 2021 and have been detained by the Taliban, we will not rest until we bring you home. Since September 2021, the administration has resettled more than 185,000 Afghans. We've approved or welcomed to the United States more than 68,000 Afghans under the special immigrant visa program. That is nearly half of all of the SIVs issued since the program's inception in 2009. This is a profoundly difficult period for the Afghan people, especially Afghanistan's women and girls. But I believe the final chapter has not been written on Afghanistan. Just last week, I had the chance to be with many partners who supported the evacuation effort, including members of Congress. We were joined by a resilient and resourceful young woman who left Afghanistan in August 2021 and is now an aerospace engineering student at MIT. She aspires to be the first Afghan woman astronaut. In part because of our two-decade commitment to Afghanistan, there are many more women who have the opportunity to go to school, to connect with the wider world, to imagine a different life for themselves. And these women, their experiences, their hopes, will, I know, one day help pave a path to an Afghanistan where all people can actually choose their own futures. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I personally, and other members, we got 4 busloads of girls at the American School of Music out after Abbeygate, who are now in Portugal. They performed at Carnegie Hall and the Kennedy Center. But there are many women, unfortunately, who are now enslaved under Sharia law by the Taliban. I now recognize myself for questions. Mr. Secretary, in September of this year, your State Department's Inspector General revealed that Embassy Kabul, under your leadership, abandoned, quote, sensitive security assets, unquote, during the deadly Afghanistan evacuation. Those lethal assets include firearms, armored vehicles, and other weapons. Your IG concluded the embassy left them intact for the Taliban. And if that wasn't bad enough, documents, classified documents, many that I subpoenaed, also reveal that you left behind droves of the embassy's, again, classified documents to the Taliban. Your own diplomats described desperate attempts to burn documents on the rooftops and in the embassy while helicopters took off the embassy's roof, very reminiscent in my younger life of Saigon. All because the administration failed to prepare. Finally, your chief of mission kicked out the embassy's Afghan employees from HKIA, telling them to come back later, leaving them to the Taliban, who never made it back, who never survived, who we gave our trust to that we would protect them. You left weapons behind to the Taliban, classified documents to the Taliban. You left behind embassy employees to the Taliban. And now 3 years later, your own IG, Inspector General, concluded that your State Department has been unwilling and unable to learn from its mistakes. My question is, have you read the IG report and have you held your own State Department accountable?
Mr. Chairman, first, with regard to the documents, we have in place at every embassy, including in Afghanistan, a process by which sensitive documents are destroyed in the event of an evacuation and shutting down the embassy. We began that process on August the 1st. And then when we got to August the 12th, before the collapse of Kabul, we proceeded with the emergency destruction of all of the remaining sensitive documents. And that process was complete by the 14th, a day before Kabul fell. That's a process that we engage in wherever we have an emergency, and that's exactly
Well,
what
reclaim
we
my
did in
time. I
Afghanistan.
mean, the fact is, they should have been evacuated long before. I mean, you were still negotiating as the Taliban entered Kabul. The embassy should have been, as the military advised you to do, evacuate that embassy. Let me ask you this. When President Biden announced his unconditional surrender to the Taliban on April the 14th, 2021, you demanded that Embassy Kabul remain open, no matter what the cost. Your personnel opposed that. In fact, they did so in a cabled dissent that we were able to get from you in our discovery process, a cry for help. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs to the CENTCOM commander, Millie McKenzie, said this was a fundamental mistake, a fatal flaw, and their biggest regret is keeping the embassy open despite the advice of your own people on the ground and military advisors. Why did you do that?
Very simply, because no one anticipated that the government and the Afghan armed forces would collapse as quickly as they did. We anticipated, and every intelligence assessment that we had anticipated, that Kabul would remain in the hands of the government, in the hands of the Afghan armed forces, through the balance of the year and
I
into
mean,
the
I'm
next
reclaiming
year.
my time because I
Well,
want to
let
say.
me please, let me finish.
I will let you
Ch-
finish,
the
but
chairman,
I strongly
the chairman of the Joint
disagree with
Chiefs,
that comment.
Mark Milley, said, "Nothing I or anyone else saw indicated a collapse of the Army or the government in 11 days. The DNI, Avril Haines said, in the days leading up to the Taliban takeover, intelligence agencies did not see collapse as imminent. This unfolded more quickly than they anticipated, including in the intelligence community."
Okay, reclaiming my time, I hear what you're saying, that no one saw the collapse coming. However, I've read the dissent cable, your embassy personnel, that you provided to me, that they sent to you in July before the collapse in 2021, warning of Afghanistan's imminent collapse, fearing for their safety. You personally read this, sir, and cleared it. Your Deputy Secretary, Brian McKeon, testified before this committee that you took no step to answer the cries for help. And as you know, Secretary of State, you have a responsibility to protect Americans and diplomats.
Mr. Chairman, that's incorrect.
Why did you ignore the cries for help? Why did you leave this embassy open? And finally, who was in charge? Was it you or Mr. Sullivan? Because it seems to me you delegated all your responsibility on this. You had very little to do with it, and it was Jake Sullivan and the National Security Council at the White House calling all the shots. However, under law, sir, you're the captain of the ship.
Mr. Chairman, that's incorrect on a number of counts, as is the report that I've read. First, when it comes to a NEO, the evacuation, that is a decision that's reached by the entire interagency and ultimately by the President. The State Department initiates it by asking the Department of Defense to proceed with it, but the decision itself is reached as a result of interagency deliberations. And we did not, as an interagency, and that includes the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the National Security Advisor,
Who's in
the
charge?
President.
This is going to help us legislate,
no, this is
sir.
important.
Were you in charge of this evacuation?
I was in charge of the State Department. The government, the administration, was in charge of the evacuation. Specifically, the State Department and the Department of Defense together on any NEO work closely together with clearly assigned responsibilities, and that's exactly
And
what
it
we did.
is the
And
statutory
one called for that NEO
responsibility,
until
sir,
it was
for you
actually
to
issued.
execute the plan, correct? The NEO,
The
the
NEO is
plan.
executed by the State Department and the Defense Department together.
And I would have to say, sir, waiting till the last minute is not executing a plan at all. And it led to the deaths of many
Again, Mr.
Americans
Chairman,
and Afghan people and Afghan allies.
Mr. Chairman, the record reflects that, again, this decision was reached collectively. No one urged initiating the NEO until we decided to do it on the 14th.
I think in my review of our investigation, there was so much confusion coming out of your embassy, coming from the top military advisors who told me, testified that they told you to close down that embassy in advance to protect Americans and American assets and classified
is not
documents.
correct.
They were left to the Taliban. You were in charge by law. You may have delegated this. I don't know. But to legislate moving forward, I need to know who was in charge. And that's why it is so important that Mr. Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, come before this committee and give his testimony about what the hell was going on during this disastrous evacuation. With that, I now recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do recall a meeting here in the Capitol, bipartisan, downstairs, and we were meeting with President Ghani of Afghanistan. And we had talked to some folks, and President Ghani was very vehement that he was not going to leave Afghanistan. He was vehement that the Afghan troops were there and he would stay there, to all these members of Congress. And to everyone that I talked to from almost anywhere was clear that that was his position. No one knew that 1 week later, not 1 month, 1 week later, he would get on a plane and get out, and all the troops were gone. Everybody at that moment in time was surprised. And that's a fact. Let me ask some yes or no questions real quick, because I believe that you got to look at this whole thing you talk about. So, Mr. Secretary, President Trump's Doha deal explicitly committed to the United States to withdraw all U.S. and allied troops, as well as contractors, by May 2021. Yes or no?
That's correct.
But the speed of that withdrawal, outside of an initial reduction to 8,600 troops, was not specified by the deal. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And despite that, President Trump unilaterally reduced the U.S. presence twice beyond that, leaving just 2,500 troops when President Biden took office. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So, and we've seen that President Trump was prepared to go to zero. In fact, Ambassador Calazad testified to the committee that the messages coming out of the Trump White House led the Taliban to conclude that Trump was getting out regardless of what was agreed in the Doha deal. So let's be clear about the conditions. If we're going to be factual about this, you've got to consider the conditions that Trump handed over to you in the Biden administration. A firm commitment for a total withdrawal with no allowance for a residual force or contractors, a limited number of troops on the ground, and no real prohibition or attacks on our Afghan allies. We've heard testimony from General Milley, Ambassador Calazad, and others that if we had tried to reopen the Doha deal, the Taliban would have resumed attacks against us. Do you agree, Mr. Secretary, with that assessment? Yes or no?
I do.
So that was the fundamental choice facing President Biden, to complete the withdrawal that was initiated by President Trump, or re-escalate the conflict. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So what do you think President Biden's decision to complete the withdrawal and end this so-called forever war gained us?
It gained us an end to America's longest war. It gained us not having another generation of Americans going off to fight and die in Afghanistan. It gained us the opportunity to refocus and rededicate our resources to the challenges of this moment, from the Russian aggression against Ukraine, to the many challenges posed by China, to many other issues around the world where we were able to free up resources, free up focus, free up time.
You just hit something, because just months after the withdrawal from Afghanistan, we did face a new threat, and that was Putin's illegal and unjustified renewed invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. So yes or no, do you see any connection between Putin's re-invasion of Ukraine and the United States withdrawal from Afghanistan?
No, on the contrary. I think our adversaries, including Russia, would have been delighted if we had doubled down and remained stuck in Afghanistan for another 20 years. Now, in 2008, we had, between Afghanistan and Iraq, about 200,000 forces deployed. You'll recall what else happened in 2008. Russia invaded Georgia. In 2014, we still had about 12,000 forces in Afghanistan. You'll recall what else happened in 2014. Russia, for the first time, invaded Ukraine. Because we were able to refocus our time, our resources, our efforts, we were able to build this coalition of more than 50 countries that has stood up to Russia's aggression. And I must say, the chairman has done a remarkable job over these last 3 years.
I agree. We worked very closely,
in that coalition.
the chairman and I, in making sure Ukraine has everything that it needs. In fact, sometimes he was in front of me, and other times we went together, but he has been a champion on Ukraine. But the issue that I'm trying to make sure, and I think this is what you said, that the withdrawal from Afghanistan did not hinder our capacity or our credibility to lead our allies in a robust response to the invasion in Ukraine. That's correct?
That is correct.
As well as that withdrawal did not inhibit our relationships with our allies.
That is correct.
In fact, just the opposite. It may be my last question, your assessment of the strength of NATO and our alliances system today. Has the withdrawing from Afghanistan let us focus on the most urgent threats to global security? Yes or no?
NATO is stronger, it's bigger, it's better resourced, it's more focused than it's ever been.
The gentleman's time has expired. Let me just say, with the fall of Afghanistan, within months, Chairman Xi and Putin made an agreement at the Olympics in Beijing, and we saw satellite imagery of the Russian Federation moving towards Ukraine. I don't think that was by accident. That was by design. Putin saw weakness, and he took aggression, and he invaded Ukraine, and then the Ayatollah reared his ugly head in the Middle East, and Chairman Xi is on fire in a hot zone in the Indo-Pacific. With that, the chairman now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Smith.
Thank you very much. Pardon me, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Secretary. You know, I have a number of questions, and I've asked some of those in the past, and so I won't repeat those. But I chair the China Commission. I've chaired 105 plus hearings on human rights abuse in China, Xi Jinping's absolute malevolent behavior towards the Uyghurs, and all the other atrocities that are committed each and every day. But what concerned me with our, I believe, egregiously flawed exodus from Afghanistan was how dictators around the world, especially Xi Jinping, looked at that and his propaganda organs like the Global Times and said to the people of Taiwan, here's one editorial, why the U.S. will abandon Taiwan eventually. Another one was Afghan abandonment is a lesson for the Taiwan's DPP. And then when you read it, they're telling the people over and over again in Taiwan that America's resolve was questioned, is questionable, that we will leave them too. And you know, I won't read the editorial, but editorials, because they are very, very disturbing. You know, dictators love weakness. They probe with bayonets, and if they can get away with something, they will. And I think the chairman is right when he talks about Putin as well. And you had said before how you thought they would be happy if we were bogged down for the next 20 years. But I look at it a different way. They look at how it was done. Yes, we were going to get out of Afghanistan, but the way we did it led to the loss of American lives, which we've seen the pictures again shown here. And we've all met with those families of those loved ones and countless numbers of Afghans. So the impact of this, can you at least admit that to the dictatorships of the world, they saw that and they saw it as weakness, and they go to avoid if they think there is one. Secondly, how many Americans are still in Afghanistan? And post-Exodus, how many were jailed, killed, tortured, left behind? I know that there was a lot of talk that we encourage people to leave, but we all remember that Reuters broke that story about how the president had, in a conversation with Ghani, had said very clearly that even if we have to make it up in terms of the situation, to project it as if it's better than it is, and here's the way he put it. This is President Biden. And there's a need, whether it's true or not, there's a need to project a different picture. And that was done on July 23rd. So while we may admonish people to leave, they're listening to our own president who says there's a 300,000-man army, well-trained, but meanwhile, in back channel, talking on the phone to Ghani, he's saying, project a different picture. Very, very disturbing. I mean, we got to be truthful.
Thank you. Two things on this. First, we engaged in a sustained campaign to get every American in Afghanistan who was still there to leave. 19 messages to that community between February and August. And by the time the evacuation took place, there were still about 6,000 Americans left in Afghanistan. Now, who are they? They're almost all dual citizens, almost all of whom, had lived, worked, had their families in Afghanistan for generations. And so you were still down to 6,000, despite every effort to get people to leave, including offering to pay for their travel. The airport remained open until August the 15th. In the weeks of the evacuation, the 2 weeks of the evacuation, almost all of those 6,000 remaining, we were able to get out. We were left with a few hundred on August the 31st. There were a couple of hundred, and this is what I testified to, who had identified themselves to us. And keep in mind, as you know, when you travel to a foreign country or you leave a foreign country as an American, you don't have to register. You don't have to make yourself known. We made every effort to get in contact with everyone, but by the time of the end of the evacuation, there were still a couple of hundred American citizens left who had identified themselves to us and told us they wanted to leave and who couldn't get to the airport or get into the airport. There were several hundred others who were there and we knew of who did not want to leave, either because they didn't want to leave extended family members behind or they just chose not to leave. So after August 31st, as I said and committed to this committee and to this country, there is no deadline on getting Americans out of Afghanistan who want to leave. In the ensuing 3 months, till the end of the year, we got 500 American citizens out of Afghanistan who had identified themselves to us and said they wanted to leave. To my knowledge, every American who identified themselves and said that they wanted to leave has been given an opportunity to do so, and we've carried that out every single day. As to those who went back and some who got detained, we are working every day to get them out, to get them back, and we will not stop for the duration of this administration, and I know that the incoming Trump administration will carry that on if we're not successful in getting them
Amount
back.
of time. Are any in jail today?
Yes,
They are.
they are. These are Americans who went after the evacuation for a variety of reasons. We're talking
Gentleman's time
about
has
7
expired.
people.
I am going to keep the 5-minute rule to strictly because I want every member to be able to have time to ask questions. Chair now recognizes Mr. Sherman.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for your service to our country. You bring up the fact that Americans in a war zone don't have to register with the embassy. I think we've talked in the past about requiring Americans in designated dangerous countries to register, and I look forward to working with your successor to do that, because you point out how difficult it is for the embassy and to deal with these situations. Before I get to Afghanistan, back in May, you agreed that you would look at designating the Popular Resistance Committees, the third biggest terrorist group operating in Gaza, as a terrorist organization. They are responsible for so many deaths, including 3 Americans. This committee voted for my bill to so designate them. Do I have your commitment that in the next 2 weeks, your department will make a decision as to whether to designate the Popular Resistance Committees a terrorist organization?
If we can complete the work necessary to go into that, yes. I don't know if
Well, I asked you to do it in May. How many years does it take?
Well, as you know, there's a lot that goes into these designations.
I
making sure that
do.
we meet the law, and if we can complete that work, we will.
When you were here in the past, I think you correctly told us you inherited a deadline. You did not inherit a plan. The gentleman from New Jersey argues that we should have stayed. But that's after Trump released 5,000 bloodthirsty terrorists. Had we stayed, would those terrorists, including the current head of Afghanistan, who was also released by Trump, been able to, would they have been willing to risk the lives, every one of those 5,000 risk their lives in order to kill as many Americans as possible?
That seems highly likely. I can't speak to every one of the 5,000, but certainly many of them went back to the fight.
So we we went into Afghanistan, we drove al-Qaeda out, we accomplished something in the George W. Bush administration. In Obama administration, we killed bin Laden. We stayed in Afghanistan for the whole Trump administration. 63 of our best and died. 57 came back without the president bothering to be at the ceremony with their return. The question is, did we accomplish anything during the Trump administration? Did we get a better deal in 2020 than we could have gotten in 2017? Now, the deal we got in 2017 was total surrender. The only requirement was that the Taliban not be a center for international terrorism. They have that obligation anyway. The They did not commit themselves to protecting our troops on the way out or our embassy on the way out. And moreover, the Taliban is not in violation of the Trump agreement when they hold 12-year-old girls as sex slaves, kill every LGBT person they can, kill any Afghan that converts to Christianity. So the deal was the weakest ever, and it had no enforcement. So so couldn't we have gotten that same deal in 2017? And would 63 more American soldiers be alive if we had done that then?
Look, in fairness, I think we have to ask ourselves about our ongoing presence in Afghanistan after we got bin Laden. We had dismantled al-Qaeda. We'd removed it as a threat. We got the leader, the guy who
Right.
attacked
So
us
if we
on. So I think
so
we
we
need to look
got
back
something.
we need to
when
look
we
back at the entire
right.
at this entire period and look at the
But
decisions
clearly
that everyone
the
made.
Trump years, 4 years of death of American troops, and we accomplished absolutely nothing. We signed an agreement under which the Afghan government is free to use 12-year-old girls as sex slaves and to kill those who convert to Christianity. Some 11 to $13 billion of U.S. weapons were sent by Trump and scattered all over Afghanistan. And this committee has put forward the idea that we should have somehow collected those weapons from men who wanted to keep them and who were armed with those weapons. Could we have accomplished that without any significant American casualties all over Afghanistan collecting the weapons?
No, we could not.
Would there have been hundreds of American casualties in your estimation?
I can't give you a number, but certainly there would have been casualties.
I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Let me announce also that Mr. Sullivan, National Security Advisor, has agreed to testify before this committee on December the 17th at noon. And I insisted on behalf of the members that all members be able to participate in that briefing. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from South.
Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. And while you're at it, please leave us a comment. Thank you for watching.